The woman was drowning in air when Tate Redhorn found her collapsed against the red rocks of the Arizona Territory. Her throat so swollen she could barely pull breath through it, her lips blue as winter sky. And in her trembling hand she clutched a piece of prickly pear cactus, like it was the last thing on earth that could save her. Tate had been tracking elk through the canyon country south of Canyon de Chelly, when his mare suddenly stopped and refused to move forward. The horse snorted hard and pawed at the ground with her hoof. Tate trusted his animals more than he trusted most men, so he slid down from the saddle and scanned the brush. That was when he saw the shape half hidden beneath a twisted juniper tree. At first he thought it was a coyote or maybe a deer brought down by a mountain lion, but then the shape moved. Just barely. A hand lifted an inch off the ground and fell back down like it had used the last bit of strength left in the body it belonged to. Tate moved fast. He crossed the distance in seconds and dropped to one knee beside her. The woman was young, maybe 20 or 21. With dark hair tangled across her face and dust caked so thick on her skin, she looked like she had been buried and dug herself back out. Her eyes were half closed and glassy. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that sounded wet and wrong. Tate had seen snakebite before. He had seen heatstroke and dehydration and fever. But this was something else. Her neck was swollen on one side, bulging outward like something had taken root beneath the skin. When he touched her forehead, the heat radiating off her body made him pull his hand back. She stirred at his touch and her eyelids fluttered open. For a moment, she just stared at him like she could not figure out if he was real or some fevered dream sent to trick her. Then her lips moved. No sound came out at first, just a dry clicking noise from the back of her throat. Tate leaned closer. He could see her struggling to form words, her tongue thick and clumsy in her mouth. "Make me swallow," she whispered. The words were so faint he almost missed them. Slowly, Tate did not waste time asking questions. He reached for the canteen tied to his belt and uncorked it with his teeth. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and lifted her just enough to tilt her head back. Her whole body was limp and heavy in his arms, like she had given up holding herself together. He brought the canteen to her lips and let a few drops of water touch her tongue. She flinched. Her throat convulsed and she coughed, a horrible rattling sound that shook her entire chest. Tate kept his voice low and steady. "Stay awake," he said. "I'm here. Don't let go now." He poured a little more water into her mouth, slower this time, just enough to wet her lips and tongue. She swallowed with effort, her throat working against whatever swelling had taken hold inside. Her fingers reached up and grabbed his wrist. The grip was weak but desperate, like she was holding onto the only solid thing left in a world that had gone sideways on her. Tate studied her face while she drank. Beneath the dust and sunburn, she had fine features and pale skin that told him she was not from this part of the territory. Her dress was torn in several places and stained with blood along the hem. One of her boots was missing. Her feet were cut and blistered, the kind of damage that came from walking barefoot across sharp rocks and desert hardpan for miles. "What happened to you?" Tate asked, but she did not answer. She just kept her eyes locked on his face like she was afraid he might disappear if she looked away. He gave her another careful sip of water and then pulled the canteen back. Too much too fast would make her sick. He had learned that the hard way years ago when he found a trapper dying of thirst near the San Juan River. The woman's breathing started to even out, but the swelling in her neck had not gone down. Tate brushed the hair away from her face and saw a dark puncture wound just below her jaw, angry and red with infection spreading outward in thin lines beneath her skin. It was not a snake bite. The mark was too clean, too deliberate. Someone had stabbed her with something, maybe a knife or a sharp piece of metal, and whatever had been on the blade was poisoning her from the inside. "Who did this?" Tate said, his voice harder now. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, her lips trembling. "Don't let him find me," she whispered. Please." Before Tate could ask who she meant, the sound of hooves echoed across the canyon. He turned his head and saw a rider on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the bright sky. The man sat tall in the saddle, watching them. He was too far away for Tate to make out his face, but something about the way he held himself, still and patient like a hawk watching a rabbit, made Tate's instincts flare. The rider stayed there for a long moment, just staring. Then he turned his horse and disappeared over the ridge. Tate felt his jaw tighten. Whoever that man was, he had seen them. And if the woman was running from someone, that someone now knew exactly where she was. Tate looked down at her again. She had passed out, her head resting against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. He needed to move her somewhere safe, somewhere he could treat the infection before it spread any further. His camp was half a day's ride north, tucked into a canyon where the walls rose high enough to block the wind and a spring bubbled up from the rocks. It was not much, but it was hidden. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like the desert had already started taking pieces of her away. Tate carried her to his horse and settled her in front of the saddle, holding her upright with one arm while he climbed up behind her. The mare shifted beneath the extra weight, but did not protest. Tate nudged her forward, and they started north, moving at a steady pace through the scrub and stone. The journey took longer than Tate expected. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering words he could not understand, other times going completely still in a way that made him press his fingers to her neck, just to make sure her heart was still beating. The sun climbed higher, and the heat pressed down on them like a physical weight. Tate kept the mare moving at a steady walk, stopping every hour to give the woman more water and check the wound on her neck. Each time he looked, the infection seemed worse. The swelling had spread further down toward her collarbone, and the skin had taken on a dark purple hue that made Tate's stomach tighten. He had seen men die from infected wounds before, watched them slip away despite everything anyone tried to do for them. The thought of this woman dying in his arms before he could even learn her name made something twist inside his chest. By midday, they reached the canyon. Tate guided the mare through the narrow entrance, the walls rising up on either side to block out the worst of the sun. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the shade, and Tate felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. He followed the winding path deeper into the canyon, past formations of red rock that looked like they had been carved by the hands of giants, until he reached the sheltered alcove where he had made his camp. It was a simple setup. A lean-to built against the canyon wall, a fire pit ringed with stones, a stack of firewood covered with a tarp, and a few supplies tied up in a tree to keep them away from animals. Tate had been using this place as a base for the better part of 2 months, while he hunted and trapped in the surrounding country. It was quiet and isolated, the kind of place a man could go when he wanted to be left alone. He dismounted and lifted the woman down from the horse. She stirred a little but did not wake. Tate carried her to the lean-to and laid her on a bed of blankets and hides he had spread out on the ground. He pulled another blanket over her and then stepped back to get a better look at her in the softer light beneath the overhang. The swelling in her neck had gotten worse. The skin was tight and shiny, and when he pressed his fingers gently against it, he could feel heat radiating from deep inside. Tate built a fire and set a pot of water over the flames to boil. While he waited, he sorted through his supplies and pulled out a small leather pouch that held the medicines and remedies he carried with him. There was willow bark for pain, yarrow for bleeding, sage and juniper for infection. His grandmother had taught him about these plants when he was a boy, back when she still lived in the old way and moved with the seasons across the land that had belonged to their people for generations. He crushed a handful of sage leaves between his palms and added them to the boiling water, then let the mixture steep until the air smelled sharp and clean. While the tea brewed, Tate went to the spring and filled his canteen with fresh water. The spring was one of the reasons he had chosen this canyon. The water came up cold and clear from somewhere deep in the rock, tasting of minerals and stone. He drank deeply and then splashed some on his face, washing away the dust and sweat from the long ride. When the tea was ready, Tate poured some into a tin cup and let it cool, just enough that it would not burn her mouth. He knelt beside the woman and lifted her head again. "You need to drink this," he said quietly. "It will help." Her eyes opened, unfocused and glassy with fever. She looked at him like she was trying to remember who he was. Tate brought the cup to her lips and tipped it slowly. The tea was bitter, and she grimaced, but she swallowed it down without protest. He gave her the whole cup, a little at a time, and then set it aside and checked the wound on her neck again. The infection was spreading faster than he had hoped. Tate knew he needed to draw the poison out before it reached her blood. He heated the blade of his hunting knife in the fire until the metal glowed red, then let it cool, just enough to touch. The woman watched him with wide eyes, her breath coming faster. "This is going to hurt," Tate said. "But I need to drain the wound." "Do you understand?" She nodded, her jaw clenched tight. Tate placed one hand on her shoulder to hold her steady and pressed the tip of the knife against the swollen skin. She gasped and her whole body went rigid, but she did not pull away. Tate worked quickly, making a small incision to let the infection drain. Thick yellow fluid oozed out, streaked with blood, and the smell that came with it was foul enough to make him turn his head. He cleaned the wound with the sage tea and packed it with a poultice made from crushed yarrow and juniper. The woman had gone pale and her breathing was ragged, but she stayed conscious. Tate wrapped a strip of cloth around her neck to hold the poultice in place, and then sat back on his heels. "You're tougher than you look," he said. She tried to smile, but it came out crooked and weak. "I don't feel tough," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse and strained, but at least she could speak again. Tate poured her another cup of water, and she drank it slowly, her hands shaking. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes that were clearer now, more focused. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. Tate just nodded. He had seen enough suffering in his life to know that sometimes a person did not need to explain where they had been or what they had survived. Sometimes all they needed was to know they were safe, at least for a little while. "What's your name?" Tate asked. The woman hesitated, like she was trying to decide whether telling him was safe. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Charlotte," she said. "Charlotte Webb," Tate nodded. "I'm Tate Redhorn. You're in my camp about 15 miles north of where I found you. You're safe here for now." Charlotte's eyes searched his face, looking for something she could trust. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because some of the tension left her body and she let her head sink back against the blankets. "How bad is it?" she asked, touching the bandage on her neck with careful fingers. "Bad enough," Tate said honestly. "But you'll live if the infection doesn't spread." "What happened to you, Charlotte? Who gave you that wound?" Her expression closed off immediately. Fear flashed across her face and she looked away, staring at the canyon wall like she could see through it to whatever nightmare she had left behind. "I can't tell you," she said. "If I tell you, he'll come for you too. And I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of me." Tate stood and added more wood to the fire. The flames jumped higher, casting dancing shadows across the rocks. "Someone already saw us," he said. "A rider on the ridge when I found you. If whoever you're running from is looking, he knows which direction we went." Charlotte's face went white. She tried to sit up, but her strength gave out, and she fell back with a gasp. "No," she breathed. "No, he can't find me here. He'll kill you. He'll kill anyone who tries to help me." "Then you better tell me who I'm dealing with," Tate said, his voice calm but firm. "Because if trouble is coming, I'd rather face it knowing what kind of man I'm up against." Charlotte closed her eyes and Tate could see her wrestling with herself, trying to decide how much to say. When she finally spoke, Her voice was hollow, like something vital had been carved out of her. "His name is Victor Langford. He owns a trading post and half the land around Prescott. He's rich and he's mean, and people are afraid of him because he has men who do whatever he tells them to do, no matter how ugly it gets. And what does he want with you?" Tate asked, Charlotte's hands clenched into fists. "He wants me to marry him," she said. "My father owed him money. A lot of money. When my father died, Langford said the debt passed to me. He gave me a choice. Marry him or work it off in servitude. I tried to work, but he made it impossible. He kept adding to what I owed, charging me for food and lodging and things I never asked for. Then he started coming to my room at night." She stopped, her breath hitching. Tate did not press her. He could fill in the rest. "So you ran," he said. "I ran," Charlotte confirmed. "3 days ago. I took a horse and rode out in the middle of the night. But the horse went lame, and I had to go on foot. Langford sent his men after me. They caught up to me yesterday morning. One of them stuck me with a poisoned knife when I wouldn't stop fighting. They left me to die, figuring the dessert would do their work for them. They didn't expect anyone to find me out here." Tate felt a cold anger settle in his chest. He had known men like Langford before, men who thought money and power gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. He had spent years trying to stay away from that kind of evil, but it seemed like evil had a way of finding a man no matter how far he ran. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Tate added more wood and then settled down on the opposite side of the flames. He watched Charlotte as she drifted in and out of sleep, her breathing growing steadier as the medicine started to work. Outside the canyon, the night came on fast and the stars began to show, cold and distant and indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath them. Tate thought about the rider he had seen on the ridge. If that man worked for Langford, then Charlotte was right. Trouble was coming. And when it arrived, Tate would have to decide whether he was the kind of man who walked away or the kind who stood his ground. He had spent most of his life trying to avoid that choice, moving from place to place, keeping his distance from other people's problems. But something about Charlotte Webb had changed the equation. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him when he found her, like he was the only thing standing between her and the grave. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice when she begged him not to let Langford find her. Or maybe it was just that Tate Redhorn had been alone long enough to forget what it felt like to matter to someone, even a stranger. He pulled his rifle closer and laid it across his lap. The canyon was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional call of a nighthawk hunting in the darkness. Tate closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of Charlotte's breathing, and wondered what the morning would bring. Whatever it was, he had a feeling his quiet life in the canyon was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Charlotte woke before dawn with her hand pressed against her neck like she expected the wound to have swallowed her whole during the night. The fever had broken sometime in the dark hours and left her soaked in sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead and her dress clinging to her skin. She could hear the fire crackling nearby and smell coffee brewing. The kind of simple morning sounds that felt almost impossible after 3 days of running and dying by inches in the desert. Tate was crouched beside the fire with his back to her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He must have heard her stirring because he spoke without turning around. "How do you feel?" His voice was rough with sleep, but not unkind. "Like I got dragged behind a horse through a cactus patch," Charlotte said. Her throat still hurt, but the swelling had gone down enough that talking did not feel like swallowing broken glass anymore. She pushed herself up on one elbow and immediately regretted it when the world tilted sideways. Tate was beside her in an instant, one hand on her shoulder to steady her. "Easy," he said. "You lost a lot of fluids and the infection took more out of you than you think. Give yourself time." Charlotte nodded and let him ease her back down against the blankets. She hated feeling weak. She hated needing help. But her body was not listening to what she wanted right now. So she stayed still and watched Tate move around the camp with the kind of efficiency that came from living alone for a long time. He brought her water first, then a plate with beans and a piece of flatbread he must have cooked while she slept. "Eat what you can," he said. "You need your strength back." Charlotte took the plate and managed a few bites before her stomach protested. She set it aside and sipped the water instead, letting the coolness soothe her raw throat. Tate sat across from her with his own coffee, watching her with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted him to. "The poultice worked," he said. "Infection is draining properly now. You'll have a scar, but you'll live." "Thank you," Charlotte said again, because she did not know what else to say. The words felt too small for what he had done, but they were all she had. Tate just nodded and turned his attention back to the fire. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling flames and the distant call of a canyon wren somewhere up in the rocks. Finally Charlotte spoke, her voice quiet. "You could have left me out there." "Most men would have. Most men are cowards," Tate said flatly. "And I'm not in the habit of letting people die when I can do something about it." Charlotte studied his face, trying to understand him. He was not like the men she had known in Prescott, the ones who smiled too much and made promises they had no intention of keeping. Tate Redhorn did not smile at all, but there was something solid about him, something that made her think he meant what he said. "Langford will send more men," she said. "When the first ones don't come back with my body, he'll know I'm still alive. And he won't stop until he finds me. Let him come," Tate said, and there was an edge in his voice that had not been there before. "I've dealt with men like Langford. They think money makes them untouchable. Usually all it takes is one good punch to the mouth to remind them they bleed just like everyone else." Charlotte wanted to believe him, but she had seen what Langford's men were capable of. She had watched them beat a man half to death in the street, just for looking at Langford wrong. She had heard the stories about people who crossed him and disappeared into the desert, their bodies never found. "You don't know him," she said. "He's dangerous, so am I," Tate said simply. He stood and walked to the edge of the camp where his rifle leaned against a rock. He checked the action and then set it back down within easy reach. "But I'm not stupid. We can't stay here forever. Sooner or later someone will find this canyon, and when they do, I want to be ready." Charlotte felt her chest tighten. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need a plan," Tate said. He came back to the fire and crouched down, his expression serious. "You can't run forever, Charlotte. And even if you could, Langford would just keep sending men after you until one of them got lucky. The only way you're going to be free of him is if we deal with this head on." "Deal with it how?" Charlotte asked, her voice rising. "He owns half the territory. The sheriff in Prescott is in his pocket. The judges too. There's no law that's going to help me. Then we don't use the law," Tate said. His eyes were hard as flint. "We use something Langford understands better. Fear." Charlotte stared at him, not sure if she should feel relieved or terrified. "What are you planning?" Before Tate could answer, his horse nickered from where she was tied near the spring. Tate's hand went to his rifle in one smooth motion, and he stood, every muscle in his body suddenly tense. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Don't move." Charlotte's heart hammered in her chest as Tate moved toward the mouth of the canyon, staying low and using the rocks for cover. She could hear it now too, the sound of hooves on stone, more than one horse, coming closer. Her hands started to shake and she pressed them against her legs to make them stop. This was it. Langford's men had found them. Tate reached the edge of the camp and peered around a boulder. Charlotte could see his shoulders relax slightly and he lowered the rifle, though he did not put it down. "It's all right," he called back. "It's not Langford's men." 3 riders emerged from the narrow entrance to the canyon, moving slowly. The one in front was an older Navajo man with silver hair braided down his back and a face carved deep with lines. The other 2 were younger, maybe in their 20s, both armed with rifles across their saddles. They stopped when they saw Tate, and the older man raised his hand in greeting. Tate walked forward to meet them, speaking in Navajo. Charlotte could not understand the words, but she could hear the respect in Tate's voice. The older man replied, his tone warm, and then his eyes shifted past Tate to where Charlotte sat wrapped in blankets. He said something, and Tate nodded, gesturing for the men to dismount. The three visitors tied their horses and followed Tate back to the fire. Charlotte pulled the blanket tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how she must look, dirty and disheveled with a blood-stained bandage around her neck. The older man stopped a respectful distance away and inclined his head. "I am Thomas Grey Wolf," he said in heavily accented English. "These are my nephews, Sam and Joseph. We did not mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Tate said. He poured coffee for the visitors, and they settled around the fire. "Thomas is a friend," he explained to Charlotte. "His family has winter camp about 10 miles east of here. I trade with them sometimes." Thomas studied Charlotte with kind eyes. "Tate says you are in trouble." Charlotte glanced at Tate, surprised that he had shared anything about her situation. Tate must have seen her look because he said, "Thomas can be trusted. And if Langford's men are searching the canyons, he needs to know." Thomas nodded slowly. "We saw riders yesterday," he said. "White men, 4 of them, asking questions at our camp. They wanted to know if we had seen a woman traveling alone. We told them no. Did they believe you?" Tate asked. "They had no choice," Thomas said with a slight smile. "My nephews were very convincing." Sam, the taller of the 2 younger men, grinned and patted the rifle across his lap. Joseph just nodded, his face serious. Charlotte felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. These men were not going to turn her over to Langford. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thomas inclined his head again. "A woman running from a bad man deserves help, not judgment. But Tate is right. You cannot hide forever. Men like the one you described do not give up easily." "I know," Charlotte said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "But I don't know what else to do. If I go back, he'll either force me to marry him or kill me. If I keep running, he'll hunt me down anyway." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Then he said, "There's a trading post 2 days' ride north of here, run by a man named Benjamin Cord. He is honest and he does not like men who abuse their power. He might be willing to help." "Help how?" Charlotte asked. "Cord has connections," Thomas explained. "He trades with the army, with the railroad companies, with people who have influence outside of Prescott. If we can get you to his post and explain what Langford has done, Cord might know someone who can challenge Langford's claim on you legally. A federal marshal, perhaps, or a territorial judge who is not in Langford's pocket." Tate leaned forward. "You think Cord would do that?" "I think Cord would listen," Thomas said. "What he does after that is up to him. But it is a chance. Better than waiting here for Langford's men to find you." Charlotte felt a flicker of something she had not felt in days. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there. 2 days' ride, she said. "Can I make it?" Tate looked at her, assessing. "Not yet. You're still weak. We give it 2 more days for you to heal, then we move. By then you should be strong enough to ride," Thomas nodded. "We will spread word among the camps that anyone who sees Langford's men should send them in the wrong direction. It will buy you time. I appreciate it," Tate said. The 2 men clasped forearms in the way of old friends, and Thomas stood. His nephews rose with him. "We should go," Thomas said. "The longer we stay, the more tracks we leave." "Be careful, my friend. Always am," Tate said. The 3 Navajo men mounted their horses and rode out of the canyon, disappearing into the morning sun. Charlotte watched them go and then turned to Tate. "You trust him, with my life," Tate said simply. "Thomas and his family are good people. If they say they'll help, they will," Charlotte nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over her again. The brief surge of hope had drained what little energy she had left. Tate seemed to notice because he came over and helped her lie back down. "Rest," he said. "You've got 2 days to get your strength back. We'll need every bit of it for the ride north." She wanted to argue, to say she could leave now, but her body had other ideas. Her eyelids were already drooping.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
"What if Langford's men come before then? Then they'll regret it," Tate said, and there was something in his voice that made Charlotte believe him. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, trusting for the first time in years that someone was watching over her while she rested. The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm of healing and preparation. Tate changed Charlotte's bandages twice a day, each time noting with satisfaction that the infection was clearing. The swelling had gone down completely, and the wound was starting to close, leaving behind an angry red line that would eventually fade to a scar. Charlotte's strength came back slowly but steadily. By the second day, she could walk around the camp without feeling like her legs would give out. Tate used the time to prepare for the journey. He checked his gear, repaired a saddle strap that had been fraying, and packed supplies for the ride. He also spent hours teaching Charlotte how to shoot his spare rifle, a beat-up Winchester that had seen better days but still fired true. She had never held a gun before, and the weight of it felt wrong in her hands at first. But Tate was patient. "Don't think of it as a weapon," he said as he showed her how to sight down the barrel. "Think of it as a tool. Same as a hammer or a knife. It has a job to do, and you're the one who decides when that job gets done." Charlotte practiced until her shoulder was bruised from the recoil, and her hands were steady on the trigger. She would never be a marksman, but Tate said she was good enough to hit what she aimed at if the distance was not too far. That would have to do. On the evening of the second day, as the sun painted the canyon walls gold and orange, Charlotte sat beside the fire and watched Tate clean his rifle with the kind of care a man gives to something he depends on. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You could have pointed me toward the nearest town and been done with it." Tate did not look up from his work. He ran an oiled cloth down the barrel, his movements precise and practiced. "My grandmother used to say that the Creator puts people in our path for a reason," he said. "Sometimes it's to teach us something. Sometimes it's to test us. And sometimes it's just to see if we're paying attention. And which one am I?" Charlotte asked. Tate finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers across the fire. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I figure I'll find out before this is over." Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and unfamiliar. She looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared that even if we make it to Cord's trading post, it won't matter. That Langford will find a way to get to me anyway. Fear is just your mind trying to prepare you for what might happen," Tate said. "It doesn't mean what might happen will. We take this one day at a time, 1 mile at a time. And we deal with whatever comes." Charlotte nodded, wanting to believe him. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the rising moon. Tomorrow they would leave the safety of the canyon and head north into country that belonged to Langford and men like him. Tomorrow the real test would begin. But tonight, sitting beside the fire with Tate Redhorn keeping watch, Charlotte let herself feel something she had not felt since her father died. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was not alone anymore. They left the canyon at first light with the sky still gray and the air cold enough to make their breath visible. Charlotte sat astride Tate's spare horse, a sturdy buckskin mare that Thomas Grey Wolf had brought by the previous evening, along with dried meat and extra water skins. Her body still ached and the wound on her neck pulled tight when she turned her head. But she could ride, and that was all that mattered. Tate led the way on his own mare. following a trail that wound through broken country where red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels and juniper trees clung to impossible slopes. He had explained the route the night before, tracing it in the dirt with his stick. They would avoid the main trails and stay in the rough country where Langford's men were less likely to venture. It would take longer, but it was safer. The morning passed in tense silence. Charlotte kept expecting to hear hoofbeats behind them or see riders appear on the ridges above, but the land remained empty and quiet except for the wind and the occasional cry of a hawk. By midday, the sun had climbed high enough to drive away the chill, and Charlotte felt sweat trickling down her back beneath her dress. Tate called a halt near a cluster of rocks that offered shade, and they dismounted to rest the horses. Charlotte's legs trembled when her feet hit the ground, and she had to grip the saddle to keep from falling. Tate pretended not to notice, but she saw him watching from the corner of his eye. "Drink," he said, handing her a water skin. "And eat something. We have a long afternoon ahead." She forced down some of the dried meat Thomas had provided, even though her stomach was still unsettled from nerves. The meat was tough and salty, but it gave her something to focus on besides the fear that kept trying to crawl up her throat. Tate checked the horses and scanned the horizon, his hand never far from the rifle tied to his saddle. How much farther? Charlotte asked when she could not stand the silence anymore. "We should reach Cottonwood Springs by nightfall," Tate said. "There is a place there where we can camp with our backs to the rocks. Tomorrow we cross into the high country, and then it's another half day to Cord's trading post." Charlotte nodded and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "What if Cord won't help us? Then we figure out something else," Tate said. His voice was calm, but she could hear the steel underneath. One problem at a time, they mounted up again and continued north. The terrain grew rougher as the afternoon wore on, forcing them to pick their way carefully through gullies, choked with brush, and across slopes covered in loose shale that shifted under the horses' hooves. Charlotte's hands were blistered from gripping the reins, and her back screamed from hours in the saddle, but she did not complain. She had asked for this chance, and she would see it through even if it killed her. The sun was touching the western horizon when Tate raised his hand and brought his mare to a stop. Charlotte pulled up beside him and followed his gaze. Ahead, the land dropped away into a shallow valley where a line of cottonwood trees marked the presence of water. But that was not what had made Tate stop. Down in the valley, near the trees, smoke rose from a campfire. "Could be anyone," Charlotte whispered, though her heart was already hammering. "Could be," Tate agreed. But his hand was on his rifle now, and his jaw was tight. "Wait here, like hell," Charlotte said. She pulled the Winchester from the scabbard on her saddle and checked that it was loaded the way Tate had taught her. "If it's trouble, you'll need someone watching your back." Tate looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him it would be a waste of breath. "Stay behind me," he said finally. "And if shooting starts, you get down and stay down." They moved forward slowly, keeping to the cover of the rocks and brush. As they got closer, Charlotte could make out shapes around the fire. 4 men, all of them armed. 3 of the horses tied nearby where the brand of Langford's ranch burned into their flanks. Charlotte's blood went cold. Tate dismounted and gestured for her to do the same. They left the horses ground-tied and crept forward on foot until they were close enough to hear voices. One of the men was speaking, his tone lazy and confident. "I say we head back to Prescott tomorrow. That girl is dead by now. Probably got eaten by coyotes or died from the poison. Either way, Langford will pay us for trying." Another voice, younger and meaner. "Langford said he wanted proof. You want to go back empty-handed and tell him we gave up? What do you want us to do? Dig up every corpse in the territory? We searched for 3 days and found nothing." "She's gone," a third man spoke up, his voice thick with drink. "Maybe that Indian helped her. The one we saw on the ridge. Could be he's got her stashed somewhere," the first man laughed. "1 Indian against the 4 of us? He'd have to be crazy. Besides, what would he want with a white woman? Tate's fingers tightened on his rifle, but he did not move. Charlotte could feel the rage coming off him in waves, but his face remained still as stone. They backed away carefully until they were out of earshot, and then Tate turned to her, his eyes blazing. "We go around," he said quietly. "They don't know we're here, and I want to keep it that way. What if they find our trail?" "They won't. Not in the dark. Come on." They returned to the horses and led them east, away from the valley and the men camped by the springs. The detour cost them 2 hours, and by the time they found another place to stop for the night, the stars were out and Charlotte was so exhausted she could barely see straight. Tate made a cold camp with no fire, unwilling to risk the light being seen. And they ate dried meat and drank water in the darkness. Charlotte sat with her back against a boulder and watched the stars wheel overhead. "Those men," she said quietly. "They think I'm dead." "Good," Tate said. "Let them think it. The longer Langford believes you're gone, the safer you are. But what happens when they go back to Prescott and tell him they couldn't find my body?" "He'll keep looking, maybe," Tate said. "Or maybe he'll decide it's not worth the trouble. Men like Langford have short attention spans when it comes to things they can't control. Give him a few weeks and he'll find some other woman to torment." Charlotte wanted to believe that, but she knew better. Langford did not let go of things easily. He would keep searching, keep sending men, keep tightening the noose until he either found her or convinced himself she was truly dead. The thought made her stomach twist. She must have made a sound because Tate shifted closer. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. I'll sleep later. Right now I need you rested enough to ride tomorrow." "We still have a long way to go." Charlotte wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She pulled her blanket around herself and closed her eyes, listening to the night sounds and the steady rhythm of Tate's breathing nearby. Despite everything, despite the fear and the pain and the uncertainty, she felt safer than she had in months. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Trusting someone, depending on them, letting them matter. But she was too tired to fight it anymore. She woke to Tate's hand on her shoulder and sat up with a gasp, her heart racing. "Easy," he whispered. "It's almost dawn. We need to move." They rode out before the sun cleared the horizon, moving fast now through country that grew steeper and more heavily forested as they climbed into the high mountains. Pine trees replaced juniper, and the air turned crisp with the smell of resin and earth. Charlotte's wound had started to ache again from the constant movement, but she gritted her teeth and said nothing. They were close now. Tate had said half a day, and she could endure anything for half a day. Around mid-morning, they crested a ridge, and Tate pointed down into a broad valley below. Charlotte could see a cluster of buildings beside a river, smoke rising from chimneys and the glint of sun on glass windows. "Cord's trading post," Tate said. "We made it." Relief flooded through Charlotte, so suddenly her eyes stung with tears. She blinked them away and urged her horse forward, following Tate down the slope toward the valley. They were halfway down when Tate suddenly reined in hard and threw up his hand. Charlotte stopped beside him and saw what had caught his attention. 3 riders were coming up the trail from the trading post, moving at a steady trot. Even from a distance, Charlotte could see they were not traders or trappers. They sat their horses too straight, too military. And when they got closer, she saw the glint of badges on their chests. "Marshals," Tate said quietly. His voice was neutral, but Charlotte could hear the tension underneath. Federal marshals from the look of them. The riders reached them, and the man in front raised his hand in greeting. He was older, maybe 50, with a thick gray mustache and eyes that missed nothing. "Morning," he said. His gaze flicked from Tate to Charlotte and back again. "You folks headed to Cord's place." "That's right," Tate said carefully. "Something wrong?" The marshal studied them for a long moment. "Depends," he said finally. "You wouldn't happen to be Tate Redhorn, would you?" Charlotte's stomach dropped. Beside her, she felt Tate go very still. "Who's asking?" The marshal reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He opened it and held it up so they could see. It was a notice, printed in bold letters. Charlotte's name was at the top, followed by a description that matched her perfectly. Below that was an offer of $200 for information leading to her return to Prescott. Issued by Victor Langford and authorized by the territorial court. Says here this woman is wanted for theft and breach of contract, the marshal said. His voice was professional, almost bored. Says she stole a horse and ran out on a debt. That true, miss? Charlotte's mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Tate moved his horse slightly, putting himself between her and the marshals. It's a lie, he said flatly. Langford is using the law to hunt down a woman he's been abusing. She didn't steal anything and the debt is manufactured. The marshal's expression did not change. You got proof of that? Do you have proof she's guilty? Tate shot back. Or are you just taking Langford's word because he's got money and influence? The second marshal, younger and harder looking, put his hand on his gun. Watch your tone, Indian. We're asking polite questions, but that can change real quick. The older marshal held up his hand. Easy, Tom. He looked back at Tate and Charlotte. Here's how this is going to work. We're taking this young lady back to Prescott, where she can answer the charges against her in a proper court. If what you say is true, she'll have a chance to prove it. But running from the law isn't going to help her case. She never make it to court, Tate said. His voice was low and dangerous. Langford will see to that. And you know it. The marshal's jaw tightened. I know my job, he said. And my job is to uphold the law, even when I don't like it. Now you can either cooperate or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. Charlotte felt the world closing in around her. After everything, after the running and the pain and the desperate hope that maybe she could escape, it was all coming apart. She looked at Tate and saw the conflict warring in his face. He could fight. She knew he would if she asked. But fighting federal marshals would make him an outlaw and ruin any chance he had at a normal life. Don't, she said quietly. It's not worth it. Like hell it's not, Tate said through clenched teeth. Please, Charlotte said, and her voice broke on the word. I can't let you throw your life away for me. I won't. The marshals were watching them carefully, hands near their guns. The moment stretched out, brittle and sharp as broken glass. And then Tate did something Charlotte did not expect. He looked at the older marshal and said, "What if there was another way?" The marshal raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. Benjamin Cord knows Langford," Tate said. "He knows what kind of man he is. If Cord is willing to testify about Langford's character, about the way he does business, would that be enough to at least get her a fair hearing?" The marshal considered this. Cord's testimony would carry weight, he admitted. But it wouldn't change the fact that there's a warrant. Best I could do is take her to Cord's place first, let him speak his piece, and then we all ride to Prescott together. That way at least she's got someone backing her story. It was not much, but it was something. Charlotte looked at Tate and saw the same calculation in his eyes. This was the best deal they were going to get. "All right," she said before Tate could object. "We'll do it your way." The older marshal nodded. "Smart choice, miss. Now let's get moving. And just so we're clear, if either of you tries anything stupid, Tom here will shoot first and ask questions later." Understood. They rode down into the valley together, the three marshals flanking them like an honor guard or a prison escort. Charlotte could not decide which. The trading post grew larger as they approached, a sprawling collection of log buildings and corrals that bustled with activity. People stopped what they were doing to watch the strange procession ride in, their faces curious and wary. A man stepped out onto the porch of the main building as they dismounted. He was tall and lean with silver hair and a face weathered by decades of frontier life. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in the scene with one sweeping glance. "Marshals," he said in a voice that carried authority without being loud. To what do I owe the pleasure? The older marshal handed him the notice. We're here about this woman, Mr. Cord. Her name is Charlotte Webb, and she's wanted in Prescott. We were hoping you might be able to shed some light on the situation. Benjamin Cord read the notice carefully, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Charlotte and then at Tate, and something passed between the two men that Charlotte could not read. Come inside, Cord said finally. All of you. I think we need to have a serious conversation about Victor Langford and the kind of justice he represents. They filed into the trading post, leaving the horses tied outside. Charlotte's hands were shaking, and she clasped them together to hide it. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Either Cord would help them, or he would send her back to Prescott in chains. And if that happened, Charlotte knew with cold certainty that she would never see freedom again. Benjamin Cord's trading post smelled of tobacco and leather, and the sharp tang of whiskey that had soaked into the wooden floorboards over decades. Charlotte stood in the main room surrounded by shelves stacked with everything from rifle ammunition to bolts of cloth, while the marshals positioned themselves near the door like they expected someone to make a run for it. Tate stayed close to her side, his presence solid and reassuring, even though his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Cord moved behind a heavy oak counter and pulled out a bottle and several glasses. He poured without asking if anyone wanted a drink and slid the glasses across the worn surface. Sit, he said, gesturing to a collection of mismatched chairs arranged near a pot-bellied stove. It was not a request. The older marshal took a glass and settled into a chair with a tired sigh. His younger partner remained standing, hand still resting on his gun like he was hoping for an excuse to use it. Charlotte lowered herself into a seat, every muscle in her body coiled tight with tension. Tate stood behind her chair, refusing to sit, his dark eyes fixed on Cord with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. Cord took a long drink and set his glass down with a deliberate thud. I know Victor Langford, he said without preamble. Known him for 15 years. And in all that time I have never met a man more skilled at twisting the law to serve his own ends, while convincing everyone around him that he is the picture of respectability. The older marshal leaned forward. That is a serious accusation, Mr. Cord. You have proof to back it up. I have 15 years of watching him operate, Cord said. His voice was hard as iron. I have seen him loan money to desperate men at rates that would make a banker blush and then foreclose on their property when they could not pay. I have watched him bring in women from back east with promises of good work and then trap them in contracts that amount to indentured servitude. And I have personally witnessed him beat a man unconscious in the street for daring to question his business practices. Charlotte felt her throat tighten. Everything Cord was describing matched what she had lived through, what she had seen in Prescott, before she finally found the courage to run. The marshal was writing notes in a small leather book, his weathered face unreadable. And you never reported any of this. To who? Cord asked with a bitter laugh. The sheriff who takes money from Langford every month? The territorial judge who owes Langford for financing his election campaign. The mayor who is Langford's cousin. Prescott is Langford's town, Marshal. He owns it in every way that matters. The few people who tried to stand up to him either left the territory or ended up dead under mysterious circumstances. The younger marshal snorted. Sounds like you are spinning tailies to protect this girl. How do we know she did not steal from Langford like he claims? Cord's eyes went cold. Because I knew her father, Tom Webb. He was a good man who made the mistake of borrowing from Langford when his freight business hit hard times. When Tom died, Langford showed up at the funeral with papers claiming Charlotte owed him everything. Tom had borrowed plus interest that had somehow tripled. She tried to work off the debt honestly, but Langford kept adding charges. Room and board, clothing, supplies she never requested. Within 6 months, she owed more than when she started. How do you know all this? The older marshal asked, Because Tom wrote to me before he died, Cord said. He opened a drawer in the counter and pulled out a stack of letters tied with string. He knew what Langford was planning. He begged me to help Charlotte if anything happened to him. I sent word for her to come here, but Langford was watching her too closely. She could not leave without him knowing. Charlotte stared at the letters, her vision blurring with tears. Her father had tried to protect her, even from beyond the grave, and she had never known. Tate's hand came to rest on her shoulder, steady and warm, and she pressed her own hand over it. Needing me anchor, the marshal took the letters and read through them slowly. His expression grew darker with each page. When he finished, he looked at Charlotte with something that might have been sympathy. These paint a different picture than the warrant suggests, he admitted. But they are not legal evidence. They are just one man's account. Then let me give you another account, Cord said. He turned to face Charlotte directly. Tell them what happened. All of it. Don't leave anything out. Charlotte took a shaky breath. She had spent so long trying not to think about those months in Prescott that putting it into words felt like tearing open old wounds. But she forced herself to speak, her voice quiet but steady. She told them about her father's death and Langford's arrival with the contract. She described the work he demanded, cleaning his house and serving his guests while he watched her with eyes that made her skin crawl. She explained how he started coming to her room at night, standing in the doorway, never quite crossing the threshold, but making it clear what he expected from her. He said if I agreed to marry him, the debt would be forgiven, Charlotte said. Her hands were shaking in her lap. But I knew what kind of marriage it would be. I had seen how he treated his first wife before she died. Everyone in Prescott knew she had bruises, but no one dared say anything. When I refused him, he got angry. He said I was being ungrateful, that I owed him everything and he could take what he wanted whenever he chose. Is that when you ran? The older marshal asked gently. No, Charlotte said. I was too afraid. But then one night I overheard him talking to his foreman. He was planning to declare me in breach of contract and have me arrested. Once I was in jail, he could do whatever he wanted and no one would stop him. So I took a horse and I ran. I thought if I could just get far enough away, maybe I could start over somewhere he would never find me. But his men caught up to you, Tate said quietly. Charlotte nodded. They found me 2 days later. When I fought back, one of them stabbed me with a knife he had dipped in something. He said it would make me easier to handle. Then they left me in the desert to die because taking my body back would raise too many questions. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire in the stove. The younger marshal had stopped sneering and was staring at the floor. The older marshal closed his notebook and rubbed his face with both hands. This is a hell of a mess, he said finally. Even if everything you say is true, and I am inclined to believe it is, the warrant is still legal. I cannot just ignore it. What if the warrant was obtained fraudulently? Cord asked. If Langford lied to the court about the circumstances, if he presented false evidence of theft or breach of contract, then the warrant is invalid. Proving that would require a formal investigation, the marshal said. And it would have to happen in Prescott under the jurisdiction of the territorial court. Then we take it over their heads, Cord said. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I have contacts with the Federal Circuit Court in Santa Fe. Judge Harrison owes me favors, and he has no love for territorial corruption. If we can get Charlotte to Santa Fe and present this case to him, he can issue an order suspending the warrant pending investigation. That would buy us time to build a real case against Langford. The marshal considered this, his jaw working. That is a long shot, Cord, and it means keeping her out of Prescott until we can arrange a hearing. Langford is not going to sit quiet while we do that. Let him make noise, Cord said. The more he pushes, the more attention he draws to himself. Men like Langford thrive in the shadows. Drag them into the light, and they lose their power. Tate spoke for the first time since they entered the trading post. How long would it take to arrange a hearing in Santa Fe? 2 weeks, Cord said. Maybe 3 if the judge is on circuit. But Charlotte would have to stay here where I can protect her. And you marshals would have to be willing to file the motion with the court. The older marshal stood and walked to the window, staring out at the compound beyond. Charlotte held her breath, waiting. Everything hung on what this man decided in the next few moments. Finally he turned back, his expression weary but resolved. I will do it, he said. But on 2 conditions. First, Charlotte stays here under Cord's supervision and does not leave the compound. Second, if Judge Harrison refuses to hear the case or rules against her, she comes with us to Prescott peacefully. No running, no fighting. Agreed. Charlotte wanted to scream that it was not fair, that she should not have to put her fate in the hands of another judge, who might be just as corrupt as the ones in Prescott. But she also knew this was the best chance she was going to get. Agreed, she said. The marshal nodded. Tom, you ride to Santa Fe and file the motion. I will stay here and make sure everyone honors their word. We do this by the book. The younger marshal looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better than to challenge his superior. He gave Charlotte one last suspicious glare and then walked out, his spurs jangling against the wooden floor. The older marshal extended his hand to Cord. I hope you know what you are doing, Benjamin. If this goes sideways, it is going to land on both of us. I have been in worse situations, Cord said, shaking his hand.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
And I have never regretted standing up to a bully, the marshal turned to Charlotte. You have got 2 weeks to prove your case, miss. I suggest you use them wisely. He settled into a chair near the door, making it clear he was not going anywhere. Cord showed Charlotte and Tate to a small room in the back of the trading post where supplies were usually stored. He cleared out enough space for a bed and a chair and brought them blankets and a basin for washing. You will be safe here, he said. I have men who work for me, and they are loyal. No one gets into this compound without me knowing about it. Thank you, Charlotte said. The word felt inadequate for what he was doing, but it was all she had. Cord nodded and left them alone, closing the door quietly behind him. Charlotte sank onto the bed and finally let the tears come. They poured out of her in great gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Tate sat beside her and pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like a shield against the world. He did not say anything, did not try to tell her it would be all right. He just held her while she cried out all the fear and exhaustion and desperate hope that had been building inside her for days. When the tears finally stopped, Charlotte pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. I am sorry, she said. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You earned it, Tate said quietly. You have been holding yourself together through things that would have broken most people. You are allowed to let go sometimes. Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. It was not pity, and it was not duty. It was something deeper, something that terrified her because she felt it too. What happens after the hearing? She asked. If we win, if they invalidate the warrant, what then? Then you are free, Tate said. Free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Build the life you should have had before Langford took it from you. And you? Charlotte asked. Where will you go? Tate was quiet for a long moment. I have not thought that far ahead, he admitted. I have spent so long moving from place to place, never putting down roots, that I forgot what it feels like to want to stay somewhere. Charlotte reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough and calloused from years of hard work, but his grip was gentle. Maybe it is time you remembered, she said softly. Tate looked down at their joined hands and something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and uncertain. I am not good at this, he said. Caring about people. Letting them matter. Every time I have tried, it has ended badly, I know, Charlotte said. But maybe this time is different. Maybe we get to choose how it ends. Before Tate could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Cord stuck his head in, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. One of my scouts just rode in from the south. He says there is a group of riders headed this way. At least 8 men, maybe more. And they are wearing Langford's brand. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Tate was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle he had leaned against the wall. How far out? 4 hours, maybe 5, Cord said. They are not making any effort to hide their approach. Whatever they are planning, they want us to know they are coming. Langford must have heard the marshals were asking questions, Tate said. He is making a move before we can get Charlotte to Santa Fe. Can we hold them off? Charlotte asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Cord's expression was grim. I have 12 men here, including myself and the marshal. Against 8 or more of Langford's hired guns, the odds are not good. And if shooting starts, people will die. I am willing to take that risk for you, Charlotte, but I need you to understand what it means. Charlotte stood, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. I will not let people die for me, she said. There has to be another way. There is, Tate said. His voice was hard and cold, the voice of a man who had made a decision he knew he would regret. We go meet them. Out in the open where Cord's men can see what happens. We face Langford's people head on, and we end this before it turns into a bloodbath. That is insane, Cord said. They will kill you both. Not if we do it right, Tate said. He looked at Charlotte, and his eyes were blazing with something fierce and protective. Trust me. I have one more card to play. But I need you to be brave, just a little longer. Can you do that? Charlotte did not know what he was planning, but she nodded anyway. She had trusted him this far, and he had not let her down yet. I can be brave, she said. Tate turned to Cord. Get your men armed and positioned where they can see the approach to the compound. If things go wrong, you shoot anyone who tries to take Charlotte. Understood. Cord looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Tate's expression stopped him. Understood, he said finally. But Redhorn, whatever you are planning, you better be damn sure it works. It will work, Tate said. Or we will both be dead. Either way, this ends today. He walked out of the room and Charlotte followed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. In a few hours, Langford's men would arrive, and everything Charlotte had fought for, everything Tate had risked, would come down to one final confrontation. She looked at Tate's back as he strode toward the compound gates and wondered if this was how her father had felt in his last days. Watching everything fall apart and knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. But then Tate turned and met her eyes, and she saw something there that her father had never had. She saw a man who was not planning to lose. The riders came just as the sun touched the mountain peaks, silhouettes moving through the golden dust like phantoms rising from the earth itself. Charlotte stood beside Tate at the edge of Benjamin, Cord's compound, with her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Behind them, Cord's men were positioned along the trading post walls with rifles ready. And the old marshal had taken a spot on the porch where he could see everything that was about to unfold. Tate had been quiet for the last hour, preparing himself the way a warrior prepares before battle. He had checked his weapons 3 times, sharpened his knife until the blade could split a hair, and now he stood perfectly still, watching the approaching riders with eyes that gave nothing away. Charlotte wanted to ask him again what he was planning, but she knew he would not tell her. Whatever happened next, he was going to face it alone. The riders spread out as they approached, forming a loose line that stretched across the trail leading to the compound. They stopped 50 yards out, just beyond rifle range, and sat their horses in silence. Charlotte counted 9 men, all of them armed with pistols and repeating rifles. They looked like the kind of men who got paid to hurt people and enjoyed their work too much to ever find honest employment. One rider moved forward from the group, walking his horse slowly toward where Tate and Charlotte waited. He was a thick-shouldered man with a scarred face and eyes like chips of flint. When he got close enough to speak without shouting, he reined in and looked down at them with open contempt. "I am looking for a woman named Charlotte Webb," he said. His voice was rough as gravel scraping over stone. "We have a legal warrant for her arrest. You can hand her over peaceful, or we can take her by force." "Makes no difference to us. Show me the warrant," Tate said. The man pulled a folded paper from his coat and tossed it on the ground between them. Tate picked it up and read it slowly, his expression never changing. Charlotte could see it was identical to the one the marshals had shown them earlier. Same charges, same authorization from the territorial court in Prescott. Legal in every way that mattered, even if the whole thing was built on lies. Tate handed the paper back. "This warrant is under federal review," he said. "Charlotte Webb is in the custody of a United States Marshal pending a hearing in Santa Fe. You have no authority here." The scarred man's face twisted into something ugly. "That is a pretty story, but I don't see any federal marshal. All I see is an Indian and a runaway whore who thinks she can hide behind some old trader's walls." Tate's hand moved so fast Charlotte barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, and the next his knife was out and pressed against the scarred man's throat before the man could even reach for his gun. The other riders started forward, but Tate's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Tell your men to stay where they are, or I open your neck right here." The scarred man went very still, his eyes wide. "Easy," he said carefully. "No need for this to get messy." "It got messy the moment you called her a whore," Tate said. His voice was cold as winter ice. "Now you are going to turn your horse around and ride back to Prescott, and you are going to tell Victor Langford that Charlotte Webb is under federal protection. If he wants her, he can come get her himself instead of sending hired dogs to do his dirty work. Langford does not take kindly to being threatened." "I am not threatening him," Tate said. "I am making him a promise. If he sends men after Charlotte again, I will come to Prescott, and I will burn everything he owns to the ground. His trading post, his house, his business ledgers. All of it. And then I will find him, and I will give him the same choice he gave Charlotte. Run or die." The scarred man's jaw worked, but he did not speak. Tate pulled the knife away and stepped back, never taking his eyes off the riders. "You have got 10 seconds to leave before my friends on those walls start shooting. I suggest you use them." For a long moment nobody moved. The air felt heavy and tight like the instant before lightning strikes. Then the scarred man spat in the dust and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over," he snarled. "Langford will have his due. Let him try," Tate said. The riders turned and galloped back the way they had come, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Charlotte realized she had been holding her breath and let it out in a long, shaky exhale. Tate stood watching until the last rider vanished from sight. Then he lowered his knife and turned to her. "Are you all right?" Charlotte nodded even though her whole body was trembling. "You could have gotten yourself killed, maybe," Tate said. "But they needed to understand that taking you is not going to be easy. Men like that are bullies. They are used to people being afraid of them. Show them you are not afraid, and sometimes they back down. And if they don't back down?" Charlotte asked. Tate's expression went dark. "Then we deal with what comes." Benjamin Cord came down from the porch with the marshal behind him. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Cord said. "I have not decided which yet. Bit of both," Tate admitted. He looked at the marshal. "They are going to go back to Langford and tell him what happened here. What do you think he does next?" The marshal rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "If he is smart, he waits for the hearing and tries to win through the courts. But Langford did not get where he is by being patient. My guess is he escalates. Maybe tries to pressure Judge Harrison, maybe comes after Charlotte himself with more men. Either way, we need to move up our timeline. How fast can you get her to Santa Fe? Cord asked. On horseback, pushing hard 3 days, the marshal said. But that means riding through open country, where Langford's men could ambush us. Safer to wait for the stage, but that is another week. We don't have a week, Tate said. Langford knows where she is now. He will come back with more men, and next time he will not bother talking first. We need to move tonight. Charlotte felt her stomach twist. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that terrified her. Tonight, she repeated. Just us. Not just us, Cord said. He looked at the marshal. I am coming too. And I am bringing 2 of my best men. If Langford wants trouble, he can have it. The marshal hesitated, then nodded. All right. We leave in 2 hours. Pack light and bring extra ammunition. And someone needs to stay here to hold the compound in case Langford tries something while we are gone. They spent the next 2 hours preparing for the journey. Cord assembled supplies and selected his 2 most trusted men, both of them former cavalry scouts who knew the territory between the trading post and Santa Fe like they knew their own names. Charlotte packed the few belongings she had in a canvas saddlebag while Tate checked the horses and made sure every weapon was loaded and ready. As the moon rose over the eastern mountains, they gathered in the compound yard. 6 riders in total, armed and provisioned for hard travel. The marshal gave final instructions to the men staying behind and then swung into his saddle. Stay alert, he told them. If Langford shows up before we get back, you hold this place and you send word to Santa Fe immediately. They rode out into the night with Tate leading the way and Charlotte riding beside him. The trail wound through pine forests that smelled of resin and cool earth, and the only sounds were the steady rhythm of hooves on packed dirt and the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness. Charlotte kept her hand near the rifle Tate had given her. Scanning the shadows for movement, they rode through the night without stopping, pushing the horses hard, but not hard enough to lame them. By dawn they had covered 30 miles and the landscape had changed from mountains to rolling high desert dotted with juniper and sage. Cord called a halt near a spring where they could water the horses and rest for an hour before continuing. Charlotte dismounted stiffly, every muscle in her body screaming from hours in the saddle. Tate helped her down, and she leaned against him for a moment, too exhausted to care how it looked. How much farther? She asked. 2 more days if we keep this pace, Tate said. Maybe less if the weather holds. They ate dried meat and hardtack while the horses drank, and then they were moving again. The second day passed in a blur of heat and dust and relentless forward motion. Charlotte's world narrowed to the space between her horse's ears, and the sound of Tate's voice when he called back warnings about rough ground or low branches. She was too tired to be afraid anymore, too numb to think about what waited at the end of this journey. On the 3rd morning they crested a rise and saw Santa Fe spread out in the valley below, its adobe buildings glowing golden in the early light. Charlotte felt something break loose in her chest, something that had been wound tight for so long. She had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. We made it, she whispered. Not yet, the marshal said. We still need to get you to the courthouse and in front of Judge Harrison. And we need to do it before Langford's people realize where we have gone. They rode into Santa Fe through the back streets, avoiding the main plaza where too many eyes might notice them. The federal courthouse was a solid stone building on the north side of town, imposing and permanent in a way that made Charlotte think maybe justice was actually possible here. The marshal led them around to a side entrance and dismounted. Inside, the courthouse was cool and quiet, the thick walls blocking out the heat of the day. A clerk looked up from his desk as they entered, and his eyes widened when he saw their dusty, travel-worn group. We need to see Judge Harrison, the marshal said. Federal matter, urgent. The clerk stood. The judge is in chambers, but he is not seeing anyone without an appointment. He will see us, Benjamin Cord said, stepping forward. The clerk recognized him, and his expression changed. "Mr. Cord, I did not know you were in town." "I need 5 minutes with Harrison," Cord said. "Tell him it is about Victor Langford and territorial corruption. He will understand." The clerk hurried through a door behind his desk and returned a moment later with a tall, gray-haired man in black robes who looked like he had been carved from granite. Judge Harrison's eyes swept over the group and settled on Charlotte with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You are Charlotte Webb," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Charlotte said. "And you claim Victor Langford has been using fraudulent legal documents to pursue you unlawfully." "That is correct," the marshal said. He handed the judge a folder containing Tom Webb's letters, the warrant from Prescott, and a written statement Charlotte had prepared with Cord's help. Harrison read through everything in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Cord. "You are willing to testify to these claims under oath?" "I am," Cord said. "And I have documentation of my own regarding Langford's business practices. Enough to show a pattern of exploitation and abuse." Harrison closed the folder and set it on his desk with deliberate care. "This is serious," he said. "If what you say is true, Victor Langford has corrupted the entire territorial justice system in Prescott. That is a federal crime. But proving it will require more than letters and testimony. We need hard evidence. Financial records, witness statements from others he has victimized, proof that the territorial court issued warrants based on false information. How long would that take to gather?" The marshal asked. "Weeks," Harrison said. "Maybe months. And in the meantime, Miss Webb is vulnerable to arrest under the existing warrant." Charlotte felt her hope crumbling. After everything they had been through, after all the miles and all the risk, it was still not enough. She looked at Tate and saw her own despair reflected in his eyes. "So what do we do?" she asked quietly. Harrison walked to his window and stared out at the plaza below. For a long moment he said nothing, and Charlotte thought he was trying to find a gentle way to tell them he could not help. Then he turned back, and there was something fierce in his expression that had not been there before. "I am going to do something I have never done in 30 years on the bench," he said. "I am going to trust my instincts over procedure." He sat down at his desk and pulled out paper and pen. "I am issuing a federal order suspending the territorial warrant against Charlotte Webb pending a full investigation into Victor Langford's business and legal practices. As of this moment, Miss Webb is under federal protection, and any attempt to arrest or detain her will be considered interference with a federal investigation. Furthermore, I am authorizing a federal marshal to travel to Prescott and seize Langford's financial records for examination." Charlotte could not believe what she was hearing. "You can do that." "I can and I am," Harrison said. He signed the document with a flourish and pressed his official seal into the wax. "Langford has gotten away with corrupting justice for too long. It stops today." The marshal took the document and read it carefully, then looked at Harrison with something like respect. "This is going to make you some powerful enemies, Your Honor." "I have been making enemies since I was appointed to this court," Harrison said. "One more will not kill me. Now get this young woman somewhere safe while I prepare the formal investigation. And Cord, I am going to need you to stay in Santa Fe for the next few weeks to help build the case." Cord nodded. "Whatever you need." They left the courthouse with the federal order folded safely in the marshal's pocket. Charlotte walked out into the bright Santa Fe sunlight, feeling like she had just woken from a nightmare that had lasted months. Tate was beside her, his hand on her elbow, steady and solid. "It is over," he said quietly. "You are free." Charlotte stopped and turned to face him. People moved around them on the street, but she did not care. "I am free because of you," she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. "You could have left me in the desert to die. You could have walked away a dozen times. But you did not." "Why?" Tate looked at her for a long moment, and Charlotte saw something shift in his eyes. "Because when I found you out there, barely alive and still fighting, I saw something I had forgotten existed. I saw someone worth fighting for. And I decided right then that if you were brave enough to keep living, I was going to be brave enough to help you do it. Charlotte felt tears spill down her cheeks. What happens now? Now you decide what you want your life to look like, Tate said. You can stay here in Santa Fe, start fresh where Langford cannot reach you. Or you can go somewhere else, anywhere you want. The choice is yours, and no one can take it from you. And you? Charlotte asked. Where will you go? Tate smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since the day they met. I thought maybe I would stick around Santa Fe for a while. See what it feels like to put down roots for once. Maybe even build something that lasts. Charlotte reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his rough skin. I would like that, she said. I would like that very much. Tate pulled her close and kissed her forehead, and Charlotte let herself sink into his embrace. Around them the city moved and breathed, full of noise and life and possibility. Somewhere far to the south, Victor Langford was about to learn that his empire was crumbling. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that Charlotte Webb was alive and free and standing in the arms of a man who had risked everything to give her a chance at tomorrow. And as the sun climbed higher over the mountains and the day stretched out for them, full of promise, Charlotte finally let herself believe that tomorrow might actually come. 1 year later, Charlotte Webb stood in the doorway of the small adobe house she and Tate had built on the outskirts of Santa Fe, watching the sun rise over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pennon smoke from nearby chimneys and the distant sound of roosters greeting the morning. She wrapped her shawl tighter on her shoulders and smiled at the simple peace of it all. A peace she had once thought would never belong to her. Behind her, she heard Tate moving in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of him stoking the fire and setting the coffee pot on to boil. A year ago, she would have startled at any unexpected sound, her body still trained to expect danger at every turn. But now the sounds of their morning routine brought only comfort. The quiet domesticity of a life she had built with her own hands, alongside a man who had proven himself worthy of her trust 100 times over. The house was modest. Just 3 rooms and a covered porch, but it was theirs. They had laid every adobe brick themselves with help from Thomas Greywolf and his nephews, who had traveled down from the north to assist. The roof was sound. The walls were thick enough to keep out the winter cold, and the windows faced east so the morning light would wake them gently. It was more than Charlotte had dared to hope for during those dark months in Prescott, when hope felt like a luxury she could not afford. Tate appeared beside her with 2 tin cups of coffee, steam rising into the crisp air. He handed her one and stood close enough that their shoulders touched, both of them watching the day begin. You are up early, he said. His voice was still rough with sleep but warm. Could not sleep, Charlotte admitted. Too many thoughts running circles in my head. About today. Charlotte nodded. Today was the day Victor Langford's trial was scheduled to conclude in the federal courthouse downtown. It had taken nearly a year to build the case against him, months of investigation that uncovered a web of corruption and exploitation far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. Judge Harrison had been relentless, and the federal marshals he assigned to the investigation had dug up evidence that connected Langford to illegal land seizures, contract fraud, bribery of territorial officials, and even 2 suspicious deaths that were now being investigated as murders. Charlotte had testified 3 months ago, standing before a packed courtroom and telling her story in a voice that shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. She had looked Langford in the eye as she described what he had done to her father, what he had tried to do to her. And she had watched his face turn red with rage as he realized his carefully constructed empire was collapsing around him. Benjamin Cord had testified as well, bringing documentation that showed Langford had defrauded at least 40 people over the past 15 years. many of them now dead or scattered to places unknown. The trial had been the talk of Santa Fe for months. Newspaper reporters from as far away as Denver and San Francisco had come to cover it, drawn by the story of territorial corruption being dragged into federal court. Some of the articles had painted Charlotte as a victim, others as a hero, and a few had suggested she was an opportunist using false claims to destroy a legitimate businessman. Charlotte tried not to read them anymore. She knew her own truth, and that was enough. "Are you going to attend the verdict?" Tate asked, sipping his coffee. "I have to," Charlotte said. "Judge Harrison asked me to be there. He said it matters that Langford's victims see justice done, that they know their voices were heard." "Then I will be there with you," Tate said simply. There was no question in his voice, no hesitation. Over the past year, he had been her constant companion and quiet supporter, never pushing her to talk about things she was not ready to discuss, never making her feel weak for the moments when the past came rushing back in nightmares that left her gasping and afraid. He had simply been there, steady as the mountains. And slowly Charlotte had learned to lean on that steadiness without fear of it being taken away. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence and then went inside to dress for town. Charlotte put on the deep blue dress that Tate had bought her for her testimony, the first new dress she had owned in years. It fit properly and made her feel like someone worth looking at, someone with dignity and purpose. She pinned her hair up the way respectable women in Santa Fe wore it and looked at herself in the small mirror hanging on the bedroom wall. The woman looking back at her was not the same frightened girl who had collapsed in the Arizona desert a year ago. This woman stood straight and met the world with clear eyes. The scar on her neck was still visible above her collar, a thin white line that would never fully fade, but Charlotte had stopped trying to hide it. It was part of her story now, proof that she had survived something that should have killed her. Tate came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. "You look strong," he said. "I feel terrified," Charlotte admitted. "Strong people feel terrified all the time," Tate said. "They just do what needs doing anyway." They rode into Santa Fe together on the wagon. Tate had built for hauling supplies to and from the trading posts, where he had found work as a scout and guide. The town was already bustling despite the early hour, and as they approached the courthouse, Charlotte could see a crowd gathering on the steps. People from all over the territory had come to witness the verdict. Some of them former victims of Langford's schemes. Others just curious to see how the story would end. Benjamin Cord was waiting for them near the entrance, dressed in his best suit and looking older than Charlotte remembered. The strain of the trial had worn on him too, forcing him to relive years of watching Langford hurt people and feeling powerless to stop it. But when he saw Charlotte, he smiled, genuine and warm. "Today we find out if justice actually exists," he said. "It exists," Charlotte said. Judge Harrison made sure of that. They entered the courtroom together and found seats near the front where the judge had reserved space for witnesses and victims. The room was packed, every bench filled and people standing along the walls. Charlotte recognized some faces from her time in Prescott, people who had worked for Langford or done business with him, all of them here to see him finally face consequences. The air hummed with tension and anticipation. Victor Langford was already seated at the defense table with his lawyers, 3 expensive attorneys brought in from back east to try to save him. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than Charlotte remembered, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight during months of confinement. When he turned and saw her sitting in the gallery, his eyes filled with hate so pure and venomous that Charlotte felt Tate stiffen beside her. But she did not look away. She met Langford's stare and held it until he was the one who turned back around. Judge Harrison entered and everyone rose. He took his seat at the bench and surveyed the courtroom with the stern expression of a man who had heard every lie and excuse the world had to offer, and was no longer impressed by any of it. "Be seated," he said, and the room rustled as people complied. "We are here for the verdict in the case of the United States versus Victor Langford," Harrison said. His voice carried easily through the packed room. The defendant has been charged with multiple counts of fraud, corruption of public officials, illegal seizure of property, and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury has deliberated for 3 days. I will now ask the foreman to deliver their findings. A man stood from the jury box, a local merchant Charlotte recognized from the plaza. He held a piece of paper that trembled slightly in his hands. On the charge of contract fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of bribery of territorial officials, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of illegal land seizure, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty, the foreman continued reading. Guilty after guilty after guilty. And with each word Charlotte felt something inside her chest begin to unlock. Langford sat frozen at his table, his face gone gray as ash. His lawyers were already whispering urgently to each other, no doubt planning appeals and motions. But Judge Harrison was not finished, Victor Langford. Harrison said when the foreman had finished and sat down, "You have been found guilty on all counts by a jury of your peers. This court has heard extensive evidence of your crimes that span more than 15 years and have destroyed countless lives. You have corrupted the institutions meant to protect people and used the law as a weapon against those who trusted you. You have shown no remorse and no recognition of the harm you have caused." Harrison paused, and the silence in the courtroom was absolute. "It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 20 years of hard labor in the federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for at least 10 years. Furthermore, all property and assets acquired through fraudulent means are to be seized and liquidated, with the proceeds distributed to your victims as restitution. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to shake the walls. The courtroom erupted in noise, some people cheering, others shouting questions at the judge, and Langford's lawyers immediately launching into protests about appeals and mistrial motions. But Harrison ignored all of it, rising from the bench and disappearing through the door to his chambers. Charlotte sat perfectly still, trying to process what had just happened. 20 years. Langford would be an old man by the time he got out, if he survived that long. His empire was gone, his reputation destroyed, his power shattered. And she had been the one who started it all by refusing to give up, by running into the desert instead of accepting the fate he had planned for her. Tate's hand found hers and squeezed gently. "It is over," he said quietly. "Really over this time." Charlotte turned to him and felt tears streaming down her face. Though whether they were tears of relief or grief, or some combination of both, she could not say. "He cannot hurt anyone anymore," she whispered. "No," Tate agreed. "He cannot." Benjamin Cord leaned over from his seat. "There are people outside who want to talk to you," he said. "Other victims who want to thank you for having the courage to come forward. You do not have to if you are not ready. But I thought you should know." Charlotte wiped her eyes and stood. Her legs felt shaky, but they held her weight. "I will talk to them," she said. "They deserve to know they are not alone." Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown larger, and when Charlotte emerged, several people pushed forward. An older woman grabbed her hands, tears running down her weathered face. "My husband died because of Langford," she said. "He worked himself to death, trying to pay a debt that Langford kept increasing. Thank you for making sure he faced justice." A younger man, barely 20, stepped forward next. "Langford took my family's ranch when my father got sick. We lost everything. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It mattered to all of us. One by one they came, sharing their stories, their losses, their gratitude." Charlotte listened to each one, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. These were the people Langford had destroyed or tried to destroy, and they had survived just like she had. They were still here, still standing, still fighting to rebuild what had been taken from them. By the time the last person had spoken, the sun was high overhead and Charlotte was exhausted. Tate guided her back to the wagon, and they rode home in silence, the weight of the day settling over them like a blanket. When they reached their small adobe house, Charlotte climbed down and stood for a moment looking at it. This place they had built together from nothing. "I keep thinking about my father," she said suddenly. "About how he tried to protect me even when he was dying. About how he wrote those letters to Benjamin Cord, hoping someone would help me when he was gone. I wish he could know that it worked. That I made it. He knows," Tate said. He came to stand beside her, his presence solid and warm. "Wherever he is, he knows." Charlotte leaned against him and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened over the past year. The fear and pain and desperate flight through the desert. The moment Tate found her and gave her water and refused to let her die. The long journey to Santa Fe and the trial that had consumed months of her life. And now this, the verdict that meant she could finally stop looking over her shoulder and start looking forward. "What do you want to do now?" Tate asked. Now that it is truly finished, Charlotte thought about that question. A year ago, she would not have known how to answer it. Her entire existence had been defined by survival, by running, by the constant fear of what Langford would do if he found her. But now the fear was gone, and in its place was something vast and open and full of possibility. "I want to live," she said simply. "I want to wake up every morning in our house and drink coffee and watch the sun rise. I want to help other people who are trapped the way I was trapped. I want to build something good out of all the ugliness. And I want to do it with you." Tate turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I want that too," he said. "All of it. For as long as we have," he kissed her then, soft and sweet. And Charlotte kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and fierce hope she had been carrying inside her chest for months. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that came from deep inside where the broken places had finally started to heal. They went inside together, and Tate built up the fire while Charlotte started preparing dinner. It was a simple meal, beans and bread and vegetables from the small garden they had planted behind the house. But it tasted like freedom. They ate at the table Tate had built from rough pine boards, talking about their plans for the coming weeks, the work that needed doing, the friends they wanted to invite for a visit. As the evening deepened and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Charlotte found herself thinking about all the people who had helped her along the way. Thomas Greywolf and his nephews who had spread false information to protect her. Benjamin Cord, who had risked his reputation and his safety to testify against Langford. Judge Harrison, who had trusted his instincts and issued the order that saved her life. And Tate, always Tate, who had found her dying in the desert and decided she was worth saving. She had been so alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger than herself. But now she understood that survival was not something you did alone. It was something you did together, leaning on people who were strong when you were weak, and being strong for them when they needed it in return. Later that night, lying in bed with Tate's arm wrapped around her and the sound of coyotes calling in the distance, Charlotte thought about the girl she had been a year ago. That girl had been broken and terrified and convinced she was going to die alone in the desert, with nothing to show for her life but pain and loss. But she had been wrong. She had survived. She had fought her way through hell and come out the other side. She had found people worth trusting and a place worth calling home. She had stood in a courtroom and spoken her truth and watched justice prevail. And now she was here, safe and loved and free to build whatever future she could imagine. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. She was not entirely sure who she was thanking. Tate, certainly, but also her father and Benjamin Cord and Judge Harrison, and even herself for refusing to give up when giving up would have been so much easier. Tate stirred beside her. "For what?" "For finding me," Charlotte said. "For staying. For believing I was worth the trouble." Tate pulled her closer. "You were never trouble," he said. "You were a gift. The kind that reminds a man what he is capable of when he stops running from his own life and starts living it. Charlotte smiled in the darkness and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work to do, new ways to help the people who were still trapped in situations like the one she had escaped. But tonight she was going to rest in the safety of her own home, beside the man who had saved her life and then helped her learn how to save herself. And as sleep finally claimed her, Charlotte Webb felt something she had not felt since before her father died. She felt at peace. Not the fragile temporary peace of a moment stolen from chaos, but the deep, lasting peace of a woman who had faced her demons and won. The peace of someone who knew, bone deep and certain, that she was finally, truly home.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.